here have been in meetings with us before. And so you probably know that you need to choose a language channel. We do have interpretation. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a little globe that says interpretation or language. And you can select English or Spanish. You do need to be on a channel in order to really fully understand what's going on. So even if you can hear me talking in English right now, if you want to be on the English channel, please do go ahead and select English. And what else? I'll introduce our speakers today, which are Allison Schiffley and Cynthia Espinosa Marrero from Health Resources in Action. We love working with them because they really understand that the work that we're doing here in Hampshire County and are really supportive of it and help us and other folks throughout the state to understand it. So we're really excited to have them here today. And Cynthia also used to be a Mass and Motion Coordinator in Holyoke and is local. And Allison, you live somewhere in Eastern Mass, right? I forget where exactly.
I do. I live in Quincy.
Quincy, awesome. So yeah, we're bringing you in from all the way across the state today. Very exciting. Anything else y'all need from me before I hand it over to you? Awesome. Take it away.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Like Caitlin said, my name is Allison. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate director at Health Resources in Action, which is a nonprofit social justice organization in Boston, but we do work across the state, but also across the nation. And I'll hand it over to my co-facilitator to kick us off tonight.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see folks and some familiar faces. So Cynthia Espinosa Marrero, she, her pronouns. I do have a little bit of allergies, so if I do sound a little stuffy, it's because of that. So thank you for bearing with me. And yeah, we're very excited to have a conversation, one of many, right, of Health Equity 101. It's nice to see you too, Paul. It's been a while. So I'm going to be sharing my screen and sharing a fun presentation, and we'll get started in our conversation today. So just one moment. And are you all able to see my screen? Yes, I see.
Yes, perfect.
I won't be able to see most of you, so if there are any questions or anything, please feel free to put them in the chat, or Allison will direct me. But we're here for Health Equity 101, or Advancing Health Equity training. We first want to start with some group agreements that I know many of you probably are familiar with. So we really want to agree as a group today at this time that we're coming together to really be present and engaged. Step up and step back. So step up again, speak, take space and share your thoughts and ideas, but also be mindful and step back for others to do so as well. Take care of yourself. We're in a virtual world. We know that we're in your home and living room or wherever you may be. And please take care of yourself, however that might look like. Also be flexible. With technology, things happen. And just in general with trainings, there's a lot of flexibility and things that come up. So we ask that we all are also flexible. We also bring in some grace to each other, both ourselves and others and patients, especially in topics when it comes to health and racial equity, that I think we're now making more space and time for it, but it's still very new for building community, especially with folks that might not know each other much. And think of this space as a brave space to really come in wholeheartedly as yourself, to learn and grow, as we're all here together to build community and build health equity there. Any other questions or comments, or any other one that anybody would like to add to the group agreements? And hearing none, so yeah, we can move forward. So today we wanted to welcome and really get to know each other. So we're asking you to share in the chat your name, organization, your pronouns, your race or ethnicity, if you prefer to share, and what town and or city do you live in. One person whose work you admire, and one thing you would change about your town or city that you work with. So that was a lot. So I'll leave this here. Again, share more about yourself. One person whose work you admire, and one thing you would change about the town and city you work with. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that I can look at the chat and see everybody's amazing faces.
Do we have the link to the Spanish presentation, Cynthia? You do have a couple Spanish speakers here.
Yes, I believe Kristen was able to share it. I can.
Yeah, I did put it in the chat. I'll paste it again.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
And Allison put in the chat what we like: name, organization, pronoun, race, ethnicity, town you live in, one person whose work you admire, and one thing you would change about your town or city. Hi, Sue. Yes.
Were we supposed to be putting this in the chat, or are we going to talk?
In the chat.
Thank you.
Or if you want to say it out loud, you certainly can.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing first. This is great.
No veo en español aquí, ¿no? No lo veo en español todavía. Ok.
Thank you all for sharing already. Exciting to get to know each other this way. That's great. No worry, Emily. Typing is a little challenge sometimes. So thank you all so much for sharing. That's great. Awesome.
Now I have to go look up some of these folks that you all admire. Some people I've heard of and some people I have not.
Incredible. Thank you. And I also see some potential changes, like bike pack infrastructure and also some transportation and practices. So there's some similarities that are coming up, which is always good to hear, when you want to see some changes where you live. And changing names, of course, to not honor genociders. Very important. Language in naming is really important. Awesome. I'm gonna go back to sharing our screen, and anybody feel free to jump in at any time with any questions. If I can find the share screen button. Okay, here we are. Great, there we are. So thank you again for engaging us in this welcoming piece and really getting to share your story with us and with each other. So today we are coming together to really examine inequities and how they play out in local communities. We want to also review together the role of social determinants of health and describe that a little more, dive deeper, and really try to start the understanding of health equity in our communities. And again, this is like one of many training and conversations and spaces to create, to come together to continue this conversation and journey when it comes to social determinants of health, health equity, and what does that look like in our communities. So we know that steps to health equity, there's many steps in this a long journey. So these are some steps that, we as trainers share with folks both in community and organizations and groups like yours. We really want to disaggregate data and really go into that. Like, what does it mean when we look at data together? We also want to have a lens and analysis of race, power, and poverty. This is really, really important. We always want to make space and time to surface disparities and how they play into health equity. We have 4 questions, and we'll go more into details on that, on really looking at racial justice and health equity reframing. We want to identify inequities. We want to make the connections to social determinants of health. Again, these are really ways that, not folks that are experiencing health inequities or health challenges, there's more to it than their behavior. So we really want to dig deeper into that. And then I'm not sure many of you have heard this term before, going upstream. So we want to even discuss a little bit more, what does that mean? What does that look like? And we want to build strategies informed by those affected. When you're making change, and we know that there's a lot of health inequity happening, we also have to make space and time and give resources to those that are affected to really come and make change and build that power. So these are ways towards health equity. Any questions, please? Go for it, Allison.
No, I was going to say, these are steps. They're going to get a little clearer as we go through the presentation. A lot of folks are, in their journeys and hear about health equity, and they're like, but it's such a big topic. How do we get there? And so we're going to start thinking about it, right? And going over some of these steps. But does anyone have any questions so far that we can answer? Okay. Anytime you can unmute, put them in the chat. We want this to be engaging because I'm going to ask you a question on the next slide. So Cynthia's going to share this slide, and I want you to look at it. And I'm asking you, what do you see behind this data? And so this is a figure of kind of the opioid-related deaths from 2000 to 2019. And you can see, it's fairly even, and then there's a huge increase, and then there starts to be a little bit of a drop-off in about 2016. What do you see? What can you call, what do you think from this is going on? What do you see here? Any suggestions? Any thoughts at all? And again, you can unmute, put in the chat, anything that you want. And thanks for putting those intros still in there. Don't have any thoughts? It's a pretty steep incline there, and then starting to decline a little bit.
Yeah, I think. Hi, my name's Kirsten. I'm a public health nurse. I look at you.
Hi.
What really struck me is that very steep incline in the number of deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And then it might have slipped off a little bit, but not that much realistically,
Mm-hmm.
compared to what it was for, the first, say, 12, 13 or so
Yeah,
years.
years here. Yeah.
So you see kind of a spike corresponding with 2015, 2016,
Mm-hmm.
sort of that steady trajectory.
Yeah. Any thoughts on maybe why it spiked then, or why it might have started slightly declining? Yeah. Sue.
Maybe, I mean, as silly as it sounds, maybe we didn't understand what was going on until 2015, 2016, and suddenly somebody said, help, you know, what's going on? So we started paying attention to it. That's all I can think.
Yeah. In the 2015, 2016. Any other thoughts? I think that is part of it for sure. Any other thoughts?
I mean,
More
I think the political environment sort of has a lot of people stressed out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was there more
So
preventive programming or something coming out then?
there is. That
Services.
is when 2015 is when the FDA approved the nasal spray Narcan. So that started the decline a little bit, right? And this is from 2019, so we're a few years out now. So you can see that it got quite high, right? And there's starting to be a little bit of a drop in. And I bet if we had more updated numbers that it would be more because it's becoming more widely available, right? It was just to prove that you can get it from a pharmacy without a prescription or pay for most places. But when you see this increase here, there's a few things happening. One, there's the increase in recognition that it's a problem, like what was being said. It's affecting white people more, okay? And therefore now we deem it a crisis and we're gonna do something about it, okay? There have always been opioid-related overdose deaths, right? War on drugs was primarily focused on Black and brown people, and it started increasing. We started counting things better, differently, right? There's also more fentanyl mixed into opioids at this time as well, and still more now. So there's a lot of things going here. So it's always looking at the data that's presented to you and trying to ask yourself why, right? What is happening? And figuring out what is this timing? What else is going on that influences and affects it? Okay. So that's Narcan. Now, Narcan was approved in the 1970s, but wasn't approved in the nasal spray until only 8 years ago now, right? And so why is that time difference? Why did it suddenly matter? Right? Like thinking about those questions. So thinking about this, let's go into really always asking why, right? I just talked about that this was, white people started doing more opiates, or rather, it started being more of a problem. We need to think about like what is our analysis on race, on power, on poverty in this situation and others. When we quote unquote start doing something about something, who does it help and who does it not help, right? So there's a lot of funding out there right now for like opioid overdose prevention programming, and who's getting that money and where is it being spent, right? Like thinking about those questions as well. Now we just focused right in on one problem, but what we want to do now is have you all brainstorm, right? What are the bad health outcomes that people are experiencing in your communities? So Cynthia, if you want to go 2 slides down, and really thinking about what is happening in your communities. What are some bad health outcomes that you see people experiencing, that people are having? Any thoughts?
Hi, I'm Kirsten from
Yeah.
Quabbin Health District. Sorry. So I think one of the biggest problems in the area that I cover anyway, as a public health nurse, in Western Mass is mental health,
Mm, yeah,
especially youth
absolutely.
mental health. So, you know, so and as far as health outcomes, our most recent, community health needs assessment, the highest area of need for our region was mental health.
Absolutely. So mental health, I see homelessness and food insecurity in the chat. Absolutely. Both are bad health outcomes. Any others that people can think about? I can add, I grew up near the airport, and a lot of people in my age group have asthma from, I think, probably the schools we were in, but also probably from airport pollution, right? Um, and so there's a lot of folks. And so I'm sure there's studies out there somewhere that's talking about that because there's it was a small town next to an airport and really large numbers, right? Like way more than a coincidence, a sort of thing. Yep, higher cost of food, absolutely. Things that impact people's health, yep, and nutrition.
I was actually thinking about that. One of the towns I cover, all but one of the tobacco retailers in our town is within the environmental justice area of the town. So, you can see asthma, COPD, those kind of things are probably some of those outcomes from that concentration.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, asthma, COPD, lung cancer, all of that. All right. So keep thinking about this, right? The bad health outcomes that people are experiencing because we want to dig into those a little bit more. So if we talk about health equity, we also need to talk about health disparity, okay? So this is the differences in incidence and prevalence of health conditions between groups based on some of these things, right? So while everyone might get cancer or might have homelessness issues or anything like that, these things here, these groups, experience these things in higher rates. And this is health disparity, right? Because the idea is that it shouldn't depend on any demographic, any racial group, ethnic group, anything like that. But some of them do. And we need to look at that. Now, if we go back in time, and you were just talking about tobacco, tobacco companies advertise to folks big time, right? You can go back and see all those ads and where they were in papers and magazines and movies and everything. But they targeted it differently to different groups. And so when you hear about menthol cigarettes, those were targeted particularly to Black communities, right? They would go in, they'd give them out for free, they'd sponsor all sorts of events and all sorts of things, right? And so then the rate of the Black community who smoked cigarettes was high, but menthol cigarettes higher, right? And then you need to look at what is the tobacco and nicotine content and everything else and the health outcomes that resulted from smoking those cigarettes, right? So that's just one example, but there's lots in here. And you can bring it up now to vaping, right? So age can also be another category where vaping, THC, things like that, they were marketed to look more like candy products, right? The different flavors, the different wrappers. Now, some of that is starting to go away, and Juul was just, had lawsuits and lost some things, but they're still there. It was highly impactful and influential on our young people in particular, right? So thinking about that as well. Why are these folks being targeted in one way? And then looking too at health disparities amongst different groups. Any thoughts or questions on these? And you can see it still now. So like I said, I live in Eastern Mass. I used to work in like Dorchester, Mattapan, all these different neighborhoods of Boston. I would drive around all the time and I would visit schools. And as I would drive around, I would see Coca-Cola and Pepsi sponsoring big, like neighborhood community events, right? So you have these big soda companies putting on a good time for folks, right? They'd have the like moon bounces and free food and things like that. And the names, Coca-Cola, everywhere, right? I only ever saw those in Dorchester, in Mattapan, never saw them like in a suburb that was primarily white, primarily higher social economic status, right? So thinking about where do these events happen? Why are they happening there? And relating it back here. Okay. Cynthia, anything to add? Yeah, it's super maddening. The first time I saw it, I like slammed on the brakes and was like, what is happening? Why do I see red Coca-Cola signs everywhere?
Yeah, I think to add to that, we can definitely go into more examples of it. And I think this really speaks to the systematic piece of it, that sometimes people, neighborhoods, your environment is designed in a way that doesn't create health equity. So this is really speaking to that. And here we're really breaking it down to even further of the why it's happening. And it's definitely frustrating and anger. So keep that fire that you might feeling, because sometimes I feel it even though I do the work all the time, to really think of like how to make this change. And we'll go into more details because this is a systems change and this is why you build community. So don't feel discouraged if you feel that. Yeah.
Anybody have other examples or things that they want to bring up? I will say, I forgot to put my thing in the chat, but I do identify as white, primarily of German and English ancestry. Was raised in a mostly white small town. And so sometimes, this is a journey too, to be like, okay, I'm driving through Dorchester, which is a whole other thing. Why am I driving versus taking the train or the bus, which is a whole problem. And I know there's transportation issues in Western Mass. So I do have family up there and I've spent some time out there. But, it's just like you think about everything and you can go into the whys for a while. Yeah, school contracts. Yeah, right. Schools, they're getting better, and you can see some of the changes that people have put in place, right? It is harder now to find the soda vending machines in schools, right? Sometimes they're still there, but a lot of times they're gone now, right? Absolutely.
I was thinking about the disparities thing, and the thought has been rolling around in my mind when they tell us, like in nursing school, because I'm a nurse, and you read about, how Black people tend to have higher incidence of cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I'd always wondered, I wonder why that is. And then the more I think about it, the more the disparities make sense to me as probably a contributing factor to why they traditionally have that over anybody else, because their cardiovascular system is not made any differently than ours. So
Exactly.
why would they have more incidence than others?
Yep. Absolutely. So that goes back to like what was put in the chat, right? What is the grocery stores like nearby? Are there any, right? So therefore nutrition. What's the environment like? Is there a place to get outside and do physical activity, or is it not safe to be outside on the sidewalks, right? Or the sidewalks just don't exist. So either you need to walk along the side of the road or not, right? So there's a lot of things to keep in mind, right? When we're thinking about like cardiovascular health, you need to get exercise, you need to have proper nutrition, and that's for a while, right? That's not just like, okay, I'll do that for a month, right? No, that's for life. Is there another hand that was up? Yeah.
Eso es importante, pero el problema que pasa en todas las comunidades es que
That is important, but the problem that happens in every community is that one person cannot have a good health if they don't have economic resources to have an adequate way of adequate food. A person cannot have a proper diet of 1 or 2 weeks. Maybe their economy is not good enough to deal with that type of diet for more time. Maybe it's that has a lot of influence in their community, because they are sometimes some people can get sick because of their economy, because they cannot carry on a healthy diet. Sometimes the economy affects families, and maybe the parents of a family can get stressed. That's trying to keep up with their bills and their budget. Right now, everything is very expensive. There are parents that have many children, and their economies are just not enough. And they are very stressed with their families, and they are stressed in the economic side. That's why they can get this psychological stress, pressure that they don't have, they don't find a solution, and they get desperate. And for example, the stress that parents suffer, it's also suffered by children. Some parents cannot control themselves in front of children, and kids can know that they are suffering, and they get stressed too. They pick up this stress from what's going on in their families. Children suffer that stress at schools, and it is made aware that they are concerned about something. And kids are like loaded with what their parents feel. Sadly, the system that we are observing right now is not balanced, and the economy is not just balanced. Prices are changing, and they forget that there's a group that cannot be on the same spot. Right now, we can see families that cannot find vegetables and food at an accessible price. There are people that cannot buy food that is appropriate for their culture because it doesn't fit their budget. How can a family like that have a healthy life? That is something that is going on a lot in every community, sadly. Only the communities with in the higher classes can have a healthy, can live in a healthy way. But the middle class and the lower classes cannot feed themselves in a healthy way. They live with insecurities, food insecurity, and health insecurity. There are people that cannot have a medical insurance and standard medical insurance, or they have a limited health insurance that doesn't cover all the diseases that they could get. They can just stay at home suffering, and they can just try to handle that, and they cannot move forward in their lives because of their condition. There are many factors that concern the communities, and in particular, the most vulnerable communities. And that takes us to what we see right now. If what's going on with children, the disasters that are going on with children, that I don't even want to think about it every time I see the news. I get shocked every time I see the news. All those crimes that we see at schools, those children that are so frustrated and then damage the rest. They are people that are very stressed, or they are kids that don't have a good home formation because their parents are not capable of educating them as it's supposed. Those kids are loaded with the stress that their parents feel and with emotional damage from their homes. And they show that hurting the rest. All those factors that happen in families are affecting children and teenagers and also their parents, but in particular children and adolescents. If we make a list, there are lots of factors. And I haven't finished mentioning all of them because they are too much. And sadly, I will like to see change because it can be done. If, for example, the state or the government will do its effort and will work with that, it can be changed. Mainly in schools, for example, where kids don't have enough physical education. Sometimes they do have one sport that they like, but mostly they have to pay for something extra. And sometimes parents don't have enough money to take them to that sport they wish, or they cannot pay it. And the schools do not provide anything else. They don't have resources to provide that. Or maybe they do have them, but it's not accessible for every kid. They don't have all the sports that are accessible for all kids. Schools should have all of that so that kids could get to school and have a physical activity or a recreational activity that will make their minds work. And kids get to school and they have lots of homework, and then maybe they live only in apartments, or it's winter and they live in a house and they cannot get out. And that's how children accumulate stress too. And their parents, they are in the same way. Children can help with workshops at school, and the state government can provide programs for teenagers in every single thing that they want to learn. And there are many things that can be done to avoid all of that. So I think there can be a solution, but they don't move forward with it.
Thank you very much for sharing.
If I keep talking, if I
if
keep on talking about food, I think that food at schools are very bad. They don't have a
Yes.
breakfast, a healthy breakfast or a healthy lunch. So if I keep on talking, I won't be able to finish because all of that has its influence in health and in care.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing. And I definitely agree. And I'm thinking back to my youth program days where we had, lunches and everything for them, and they didn't eat it because it also wasn't culturally appropriate as well as just not good. So anyway, we can talk about that for a long time, but we're going to move forward to talk about health equity and health inequities, right? So health inequities is the difference in health outcomes that are systematic, avoidable, and unjust, right? So everything that we all just talked about are things, like you said, that can be fixed, that can be avoided, but we aren't always making the moves, right? And so you can see in this group that you are making moves, and it takes a lot of people to make those changes. So I do want to ask you all again, what are some inequities that people in your community are experiencing, right? What are some inequities that people are experiencing? And I know you named a few, but go ahead and name them again. And you can come off mute or you can put it in the chat. Some inequities that people are experiencing. Yep. Lack of transportation, food deserts, lack of affordable housing. Yep. Other thoughts?
La falta de transporte sí afecta mucho por lo menos yo vivo en Ames.
Lack of transportation is something that affects a lot. I live in Amherst, and the buses are from us, and when the students are not there, the families that are used to pick them up to go to the supermarket, they are not available. And their schedule is reduced, or they are at another time of the day, and they have to wake up earlier to get the bus at the hour that they need, and they have to limit it for almost everything because of transportation. It's something difficult. I myself, when I got here, I was very stressed at that time, because for a family to go to the supermarket, they had to pick 2 or 3 buses. And during one weekend, you could do that, and you had to forget about buying food because you wouldn't get to your home in the whole day, because waiting for a bus for 2, 3 hours, that will make around 4 hours to get to your home and buy some milk or some medication. That was frustrating, and it's still going on in the same way. Sadly, that is something that hasn't been fixed. They have talked a lot about it, but it hasn't been fixed. And there are many buses. And there was a comment made to the city because maybe they had to make a new connection for buses to be available the whole time for certain parts of the city, so that the community will reach to the supermarkets or to the pharmacy. But sadly, nothing about that has been fixed.
También otra cosa que yo, o sea, también esto
Something else that I'm very frustrated about is about the medical appointments. When the person is going to an appointment, a medical appointment, there are no bilingual staff, and the Hispanic population is the one that is suffering the most, because I don't know English or I don't know Spanish, and that person in that moment, that person has to go back home and cannot answer the questions or the doubts that they have, and they cannot take on those appointments because they don't have anyone that will be able to help them. Those people there, they are not interested in fixing that problem and having that service provided, only because the Hispanic people doesn't speak English. That is something that happens in most health centers that will make people feel comfortable.
Thank you, Joanny, for sharing so much. And all of those are real. And I'm unable to see the chat. I'm not sure if there were other inequities that were shared with folks. And I think, thank you again. I know sometimes it's really hard to sit down and think of these inequities and know how heavy it could be, how frustrating it could be. And I think you all pointed it out that, and I really appreciated that these are systematically designed, and they were designed by us humans. So it also can be redesigned to really make change. And it does take time. And it's a frustrating process on there. And I think what we're hoping, today at this time together is to look at building that space of like, wow, we feel it. We definitely want to make change, and slowly thinking through how can we do that within our own communities, knowing that we might not see the change or experience it, but then future generations will. And that's important to keep in mind. So thank you again all for being vulnerable and sharing and opening your hearts to this process. I'm gonna sort of get us going next and just sharing a little bit more of some terms that we've been sort of throwing at you and making sure that you are aware of what it means when we say health equity. And this is again coming from Healthy People 2030, a big study that's done throughout the whole nation. It's really, health equity is what it sounds like: achieving the highest level of health for all people, that everybody has a fair and just opportunity to be healthier. And this really requires removing obstacles to health, which includes poverty, discrimination, and their consequences. Those are, powerlessness, not feeling powerful enough to raise your voice or be part of the change, which everybody should, and the lack of access to good jobs with fair pay, the quality education and housing, safe environments, and quality medical care. So you all really had touched upon all of this when it comes to what health equity really means. And really, again, this is the opportunity for everyone to attain their full health potential. So no one should have the disadvantage from achieving this potential because of the social position, or the different classes, the social economic status, or socially assigned circumstances, right? Because we decided as human race, I'm not sure how it went, and we're like to create race, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and geography. So we have this design system that we live in, but also that creates barriers to access health and the full potential there.
Kristen.
Oh, go for it.
Hello. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
I'll switch you over.
Okay. So we just wanted to share a graphic here of talking about
Could you just pause 1 second, Cynthia, while I add
yes, of course.
Catherine? Okay.
Sí, hola Catherine, ¿cómo estás?
Ready, thank you.
Okay, all set. Thanks.
Okay. No, thank you, and we'll pause at any time when needed. So we wanted to share this visual graphic of sharing what equality looks like and what equity looks like. So in equality, you see that everybody got an equal bike, no matter their different movement abilities. As you see here, you see a person in a wheelchair, person that is pretty tall, another person that feels comfortable with the bike, and you see the little child person here on the right. So you see that even though we equally shared a bike, people might experience it very differently. So sometimes equality may potentially not really be, they do more damage than good in anything. When we think about equity, is really designing and keeping in mind all of the needs of the person here. So now you see the bike being more adjustable for a person who uses a wheelchair, who might have other mobility, differences from others. A person that may be taller might need a bike that's a little bit taller. A person that the bike might look same, might have different abilities or things. And again, something that really fits the person's needs. So when we think of equity, is really looking at that intentional design, intentional output or resource that helps the person access or have the best health outcome as possible. And we're saying health outcome as of today because we're talking about health equity, but just equity in general, having the best access to X, Y, Z. Are there any thoughts or questions about this graphic or the conversation? Hearing none, feel free again to unmute yourself and share there. So we hope that this is a nice visual way of really looking at equity and equality there.
I just wanted to say I love the visual, and it's so helpful to think about the difference between equality, which maybe has more to do with giving the same, like treating everybody the same, which is actually sometimes really oppressive because we're not all the same. So yeah, I really appreciate the visual. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll also note that they just released another updated visual that we've started to transition over to. And I'm just trying to get the web page for it to put in the chat. But it's even more about equity, because if I can show it, it's people crossing the street, and it's talking about like curb cutouts and how do you have your like your walk or don't walk light and sound and things like that. So it's taking in even more abilities or disabilities in there. Well, I will find that link and drop it in the chat.
Thank you, Allison. So if my buttons work, there we go. So we wanted to sort of ask you all again, so what historic local injustices and or inequities contribute to what you see in your community? So we spoke about bad health outcomes, all of these, and now we want to really look about just within your community, what are some historical local injustices and inequities that contribute to that? Feel free to put that in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself and share, you can do that. Are there any that are coming up in the chat? Because I'm sharing a screen, I'm unable to see it, so I apologize on my end.
Yeah. So again, lack of transportation services and access to affordable, healthy food. So when you think about like the historic context to that, think about how communities were designed. I don't know if people have ever heard about redlining before, but redlining happened after World War II and the New Deal when people could get really low interest rates and mortgages for homes, but it was really only for white people. And what happened was they created these maps of cities and towns, including in Western Mass. I think I can pull up an example of Pittsfield in particular, but there's others as well. And they drew lines, and the red lines outlined the quote unquote undesirable districts to give out mortgages or home loans for. And that is where the people of color lived, right? So those people could not get access to these housing programs, which is still showing up today in how generational wealth looks like, how our communities are designed, what our neighborhoods look like, and where some of our like grocery stores are, right? For that access to healthy and affordable food. There's a really good book called Color of Law. There's also a video, like a shorter video about it, if you're interested to learn more about redlining.
Thank you all for sharing, and Allison as well. And
yeah. So land theft from indigenous people. When the Quabbin River was flooded and people were moved out of their towns, cemeteries were moved for the white folks. I can guarantee you that indigenous peoples, their like cemeteries were not moved, right? And thinking about that as well, and who got paid to move out and who didn't. Yeah, absolutely.
thank you all. So we want to take a moment to sort of shift gears and really get prepared. As you feel free to stretch or anything. I think I can just stretch for a second. To really think outside the box. And you probably heard this term so much, and we really want to bring it back and see, when we hear all these things and we see the big challenges that are happening that are systematic and historic and have a lot of history that it's not told or hidden sometimes, if not most of the time. You know, it's a lot to take in. So we want you to really see it as a fuel to help you open up the box of creativity and really get us going into thinking of how to make systems change and health equity in your communities. There. So we are going to do a quick activity together as a big group, and you will sort of all mentioned some examples of, you know, inequities that are happening historically in your community, of the lack of transportation and food access. And we want to sort of share this racial justice reframing questions that really helps think through of why that's happening. And part of it is looking at, you know, lack of transportation and things like that, like who really benefits from that, who pays for this lack of transportation or only transportation in X neighborhood, etc., and who is harmed, who's influencing those, you know, influencing that's happening, and who decides that happens, and what are the unintended consequences. And these questions come really from the mass emotion framing from the program itself that both Caitlin and Kristen really work closely with these and really thinking through, like knowing that there's a lot of systems change that needs to happen in Hampshire County, and thinking of like with this framework and going from there. So we wanted to maybe ask for an example of, and we can use one again that was mentioned from some of the inequities. And I'll share my screen and type. So I'm just gonna sort of put it on this way. Oh, sorry, it stopped sharing my screen. My bad. Can you all see this here? There we go.
A little bit bigger on your screen.
A little bit bigger. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for bearing with me on this. There we go.
So does anyone have an inequity that they want to do this example for, or we can just pull from what you all have already said? They're going with it. I think let's do the lack of transportation, right? I feel like a lot of people have said that. It's mentioned it's a huge issue in Western Mass. So let's think about it and go through these questions. So the first question, just like Cynthia said, is who benefits from this lack of transportation? Who benefits? Name anyone, anything. Again, you can come off mute or put them in the chat. Who benefits from leaving this as it is with these transportation barriers? So state government does benefit, right? So that's who goes in there. Anybody else benefit? Car manufacturers, yeah. Who else? Yes, overall public transportation is very bad, yes. Car manufacturers, current car owners benefit, right? Like taxi services, Lyfts, Ubers, ride shares. Anyone else? Yes, yeah. People who don't believe in it, people who don't want tax dollars going into public transit. when we say state government overall, I don't know if that was meant also as like city and town governance, right? Like town officials or, you know, depending on how every town is set up, if there's a board or a mayor or things like that. Yep. So someone, yeah, whoever would have to pay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, my allergies are also real bad right now. Absolutely. Okay. So we can always come back if you think of somebody else who benefits, but let's go into the who pays / who is harmed by this lack of transportation. Thoughts about that? I know some has already been put in. You were referring to money saved in the state budget by not put, oh yeah, okay. So the state budget is benefits as well. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, who pays? Who's harmed? Y'all have already mentioned a bunch of audiences here. People without a car, absolutely. Yep, low income, families that don't have other means of transportation. People who can't get driver's licenses, right? Yeah, people who are food insecure. It's mentioned before that people who rely on the unreliable buses, right? Especially when the bus schedule changes with the student population, right? Disabled folks, yeah. Rural areas, yeah. People who rely on medical transport, absolutely. College students, yeah. When I worked with high school students and college students, they wanted to be able to buy a car. They would be so excited. I'm going to buy my first car. That is so financially like unfeasible for so many folks, right? I was much older than that when I could finally buy a car. And it was not a good car. And then it required a lot of maintenance. Okay. We can add a lot of folks in here, but we can leave it there. Who influences this decision, right? Who influences the transportation policies? Legislators, yep. Anyone else? There are other town officials, urban planners, absolutely. Yep. Regional transit authorities, yep. They have a say in that. Lobbyists.
I hope I'm spelling things right, but yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
What about voters? What about community residents? Right. Oh, yep. The riders and the advocates. Absolutely. Right. All right. I'm going to move us along. So, who influences is different than who decides, right? Now, there may be overlap between these, but there's also some difference. Kirsten, the voters by the people they vote for. Yes. So I'm gonna assume that's in influences. Is it also in decides? We can put it in both.
It was voters that people can say it.
Yes, it's in both. Yeah, it's voters, right? Because they influence the people who they vote for, and then they decide, right? You all decide who you vote for, and even if you do vote, who decides? Who decides about the transportation policies? People in the shadows with money. Yes, okay. So like lobbyists, but maybe they're just not known. Legislators again. Yep, town administrators, absolutely. We can talk about, yep, donors or funders, yep. A lot of times people think about donors and funders for like nonprofits or schools, but it's true for government as well, or some of the partnerships that government have, and they can be very influential. The governor, yep.
Another, oh, go for it,
yeah.
Alex.
I was going to say we can bring back the transit authorities in here, right? Sometimes they're the partnership that's like, no, we're not going to expand. We know we have a hold on this right now. Local, state, and federal legislators. Yes, Kristen. Go ahead, Cynthia.
I was gonna add, also really bringing it back to your town and community really is like your town council. Also a lot of it kind of was not mentioned here, but you really have the Department of Public Works that deals a lot with transportation things that are local. So those also are some big decision makers when it comes to transportation in your town. So folks are okay, I'll add those two.
Yeah.
Town slash so we can navigate you.
Also important, like in all of this, sometimes change doesn't happen just within one town. Sometimes it's partnerships, right? So if we look at this Mass in Motion community, it's a partnership between a lot of communities. And sometimes that's what needed, right? That's who influences, that's who decides as well. Okay.
I think sometimes too, local businesses.
Yes,
or local business owners who don't want certain modes of transportation coming close to their business because of noise or pollution or the type of people that they assume are riding public transportation.
Absolutely.
Will you include that in the influence or the side? Or both?
I kind of think maybe it's both because they influence the decision on whether or not to have it there. And they really have a lot of communities like to include their business people in the decisions that they're making.
Yeah. It's following the money in some ways, right? Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that in. And that's true. I mean, we're talking about lack of transportation. So, do we have a bus route there? Do we get a train? Whatever it is. Do we have a bike path? Right? That's huge. People don't want those in their backyards either, right? So it's kind of across the board. We don't want a bike path in our backyard, but we're totally okay with this really busy road in our front yard, right? So examining that. All right. The last one here is, what are the unintended consequences? Right? So if we're thinking about this, what are any unintended consequences that might happen from changing it or from leaving it the same?
You see, I'm not sure about the question because I think the intended consequence is for the status quo to be maintained exactly as it is. That's the big plan, and unless we start from the bottom up, which is what I know Food Policy Council is trying to do, it's never going to change. You know, people can see all sorts of comfortable words, and the intended consequences for everything to stay just the same, because the people who have power and influence and money want that to stay the same. I'm sorry, that's my cynical view.
No, I think you're right on with the intended consequences, right? This question is trying to get us to think about some of the things that may or may not happen, right? That we maybe haven't thought through. And maybe lack of transportation isn't the best example for this question, but there's always something that when we make change, things, it has like a ripple effect, right? We change this and it ripples. Now, mostly those ripples are things that we are looking for, right? We want to change that lack of transportation so that people have it, so that they can have access to food and medical services and, you know, go to their jobs or whatever that is. But if we change that for those benefits, are there anything else that might happen? People losing jobs. Yeah, they could lose jobs, right? They could lose appointments, right? If we design a bus route that only goes to one doctor's office, then that's where people are gonna wanna go, right? And so then you might have way too many folks trying to get there. Maybe that doctor's office still doesn't have bilingual services, right? So thinking about that in our design. Yes, Kristen, tax dollars might be moved away from other important services, right? So this is always the interesting thing to think about. We want better transportation and we don't want to lose other important services. So it's figuring out how to make that work, right? Gentrification is another one, right? Yep, absolutely. If we design public, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I was thinking about what you said about the outcome of asthma where you live near an airport. Well, if you all of a sudden have a lot of these buses and they're congregated to a specific area, your unintended consequences may be more asthma.
Yep,
or
exactly.
other respiratory illnesses.
Absolutely, right? If you think about like, where is your bus depot, right? And so you have a ton of buses going there, not only just along the routes, but like they're congregating there. And there's noise from them too, right? Thanks for bringing that in. If we create a bus route, then sometimes what happens is the rent prices along that bus route go up, right? When you're closer to that public transportation, so people might be forced out of homes, right? And yes, change can definitely create chaos or intense feelings, absolutely. Other thoughts? Okay. So we want to provide this framework and these questions to help really get people thinking about, right? So there's thinking about all of these questions, thinking about who benefits, who's harmed, who are the influencers. I'm really glad you brought in the business owners because they're people to make relationships with as well, right? Not only are they voters, they also have money. They have sway in the community a lot, usually more than an individual person, right? And to really think about those unintended consequences, right? So we just named some. There's going to be more. There's always something that you don't think about, right? That happens. But to start thinking about it and to be prepared to address some of these things. All right. Thanks, Cynthia, for sharing your screen like that.
You're welcome. Thank you all. And I know we're somewhat close to time, so we'll move it along. And I think it's exciting to get into deeper work. And we hope that this is, again, just the beginning of many conversations and journeys on that. And we hope that these questions and framework really help with deepen the work that you're doing. So we quickly wanted to share a little bit more about what social determinants of health are. And these are conditions in the environment in which people live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. So we wanted to quickly go through that to know that all of these really are part of the health of both an individual and a community. And these are things that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to do health equity. So I know many of you probably seen it. So one of the social determinants of health is like economic stability, and it has been mentioned from employment. We want to be able to have access to food security, and knowing that there's food insecurity, housing instability, and poverty. All these really affect health. And I might go a little fast, so do feel free to stop me at any time if I'm going too fast. Education, from access to early childhood education and development, enrollment in higher education, high school graduation, and language and literacy. All of these pertain to health in many different ways. Social and community context, which is really, really important. That sometimes is out of the data that you see, right? That we just like showed an example of anything. Civic participation is key. Discrimination is really a big piece of that affects health. Incarceration and social cohesion, if in that end. So all of these are really important when we're talking about health. Health and healthcare access. We know that this is brought up, access to health and healthcare, access to primary care, and health literacy. And all of these, again, and there's probably more under the health and healthcare piece that also affect ways that people are healthy. And neighborhood and built environment, which is really important. Access to food that support healthy eating patterns, crime and violence, environmental conditions, and quality of housing. All of these are really important to have, if a person is lacking of any of this, it's going to be really hard to focus on other parts of health because you don't have your basic needs met. And it's important to understand that that's really key for health equity. So what we wanted to, I know I went through that really fast, so I do apologize, and I can go back at it. We wanted to ask you all, what are the social determinants of health acting on the inequity you see in your community? Is it neighborhood and built environment? Is it health and healthcare access? Is it social and community context? Is it education or economic stability? So we want you to at least pick two, and we know that maybe all of them are all the inequities that are happening might touch upon all of these social determinants of health, but our question, and I'm just going to go through again, is what are two social determinants of health that you see this inequity happening in your community? And feel free to unmute yourself or write it in the chat as well.
Could you go back to the last slide or two? Thank you.
Of course. Happy to go here. I'll go through them again, just again, neighborhood and built environment. If my button works. There you go. Health and healthcare, social and community context, education, and economic stability.
So I think in my towns anyway, economic stability and access to healthcare seem to be the two most major social determinants of health. that are affecting the community, but realistically, we could probably put something under all of them, but those are the top two.
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
This is Jupong. Um, I want to speak from um a kind of odd position because I live in a community where um, I think that there are very few in my neighborhood. I live in a very privileged neighborhood and community where um, most people here are, you know, in the upper income level, and um, and I where I don't think that there are a lot of, or maybe even any of these social determinants of health inequity visible in my community. And but I also, so yeah, speaking, so I want to acknowledge that I you know, come from a position of privilege, um and I'm also really committed to and aware of um the inequity in the system, in the health systems, multiple, you know, health systems, food systems. You know, my parents worked really hard all their lives. They're immigrants. They kind of lived the American dream so that us, our, you know, their children would not experience these inequities. And yet what I experience is in this neighborhood, like I don't know, I don't have a close relationship with my next door neighbor. I know who they are because I've made an effort, you know, my next door neighbor and the people who live in my circle, in my cul-de-sac. But that's what I see is like one of the slides says something about social cohesion, that even people who are living in privileged communities don't have social cohesion. And so it's like I'm on the other side of the inequity, you know, thing. Like I don't experience the inequity, but I experience the disruption of social cohesion. And that's why I'm here. That's why, like, I want to, you know, bring that awareness to the communities that are you know, more wealthy and seem to be you know, protected from these inequities, but in a way they're not. In a way, all of us are part of the system that harms all of us. So yeah, that was, sorry,
No,
kind of long-winded, but
thank you for bringing that in. And one of the key things that I would bring up there is they're not as visible, right? And you said that, Key, like they're not as visible, but they are there and they do affect. And the social cohesion one is huge and is very prominent among usually whiter, upper class, or upper socioeconomic status communities, right? Um, but it's visible, right? Because you know, I know people who live in very wealthy places, and there's also that pressure to be seen that way as well, right? So you won't know that they are actually living paycheck to paycheck, or that, you know, they're putting on the front about driving a really expensive car, but also they go to, you know, like a food bank in another town or something like that. So the visibility is key there. And but the way you ended that with like this does affect everyone. So whether or not I personally am affected by all of these or some of these, I live in a community, in a society, in a world that absolutely is. And I would be better for it if these were addressed. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that really goes into our next point of really upstream work, and knowing that they're not visible. There's a lot of stigma around this too when it comes to all this work and how it really affects health in different ways. Right now we're seeing health as a whole human piece, from mental to like body to emotional, etc. And really the encouragement here is knowing that it takes a group, a community to come together, but really look upstream, up the river and seeing. I think there's there's a metaphor saying, if you see, and I don't like, I'm a mom, so I'm always like, my heart is always falls like when you see a kid in the river and you're trying to like get them out because they might need support, you grab them, but then when you grab the first one, you see the others are kind of going down the stream and you're like, okay, I can continue, right, to help and build things to help folks get out of the river, or do all that, but what's happening upstream? Then why are you having either children or things happening coming down there? I'm not sure if folks have heard of this metaphor and term, but other things like that, or if you're trying to really clean up the thing, like what's really changing? Why is the river, contaminated in some way? Not saying, that's another metaphor piece, like really looking upstream and looking that this is systematic. That many programs or projects that you're working on together are helping maybe people access food right now and then because they need it, and not saying that to not do it, but knowing that there's a bigger reason why they don't have food. So really asking those questions and looking beyond what's happening in front of you.
And realizing that we need both of those approaches, right? We do need people in the immediate. We need people in what we call downstream, which is the more individualized work. And we need people working upstream. And we need partnerships between them. Absolutely. I want to recognize that it's now 6:02, and we were supposed to be here until 6. So I want to open it up to any questions, and also to recognize, like, if you need to sign off, please do. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. And if you have questions later, I'm sure that Kristen or Caitlin can pass them on to us. And we can end with this kind of, we like to end with kind of a close together. What are you taking with you, right? What is your gift to yourself today? Thanks, Sue. No, thank you all so much. So if you need to sign off, please do. We recognize that it's the time, but if you have any questions as well, we're here for a little bit longer. Please let us know. And thank you for joining us. And we will be back next week for a policy, systems, and environment change conversation. Thank you.
I think before I go, one of the things that I, appreciate from this is just
but I just
thinking, the thought process.
Yeah.
To go a little deeper.
Yeah. It's really asking questions, right? A lot of, I mean, I was trained not to ask questions. And so it's a little bit of a like unlearning, relearning, and trying to view things in a different way, right? Why does my community look like it does? And recognizing that, so much of the blame is put on like individual folks. And that's not right, right? This community was designed this way, usually for a reason, right? And thinking about that. So thank you so much for sharing that and for joining tonight.
Yeah, and I think I was reading a book that really pointed out that all these policies that are supposed to prevent, different races and other different people from getting too much, quote unquote, too much, actually, kind of cuts us off too. It's kind of like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah.
And you know, if you're so afraid of some people getting something that you'll give it to nobody, then everybody
Yeah,
suffers.
absolutely.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Joining us. This was incredible.
Yeah, it was very good.
Community, and I know that this is one of many other conversations to have. So we're excited to spark it and here to support it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
Amazing.
That was great. Oh, I think the
Yeah.
recording is still happening.